It's Amethyst Virgo here to talk about astrology and your father. So, in astrology, we know the moon represents mother, right? It represents your nurturing, it represents your relationship with your mother. It represents you, right? So, the moon is not just uh, you, it can represent how you were raised, your nurturing. But then when it comes to you, it also can represent your emotional response. It represents your inner needs, right? The sun is our vitality, right? The sun is what we are conscious of. The sun is what we see. And I do want people to understand that you can apply the sun and moon techniques even if were not raised by your biological parents, even if you were adopted or you have a different experience with parenting than other people, right? But I do just want to, in general, reinforce this idea. So I talked about the moon a little bit more in a video during Mother's Day. Actually, I think it was a short that I did. But I want to talk a little bit more about the sun because I think we talk a lot about the moon, right? In terms of parenting, we talk a lot more about the moon with parenting than we do the sun parenting. But we know the development and the support we get from our parents is really important equally, right? And so when we look at the father, the sun placement can help you understand your relationship with your father. Now, you might say, wait a minute, I had a good one, I had a bad one. So and so has the same placement as me. Well, what we want to understand here is the fact that when the sun is in a certain house, it's going to give those themes. So, for example, let's say you have a person with the sun in the first house. The theme there could be your father helped you mold your identity, or your father figure helped mold your identity and who you are. That could be good. But let's say the person has a lot of negative aspects to the sun. They have the sun. You could end up with a person whose self-image is based on what their father wanted them to be, or what their father is doesn't like about them. And so this person might even be successful, but they carry on these feelings of not measuring up, right? The sun in the second house means there's going to be some theme around values or resources, and again, this is general information because your birth chart and your aspects are going to help you understand. A lot of times people want answers. It's like, well, I can't tell you what your experience has been. Astrologers can help give you, interpretations and what this could mean. But for example, if someone has sun in the second house, resources, money, and it could be good. Maybe your father provided for you, but maybe it's like your father provided for you, but wasn't there emotionally, right? Or your father held money over your head. Or some people can be your father invested in you. Your father or your son can represent a father who made his own way. He made his own money. He was very determined, and that influenced your thought process. With astrology, I want people to understand yes, we can do shorts, we can do TikTok videos, all that stuff, right? It's great for getting a quick message out there. But for us to really understand experiences, we have to dive deeper than just the surface, right? Because a lot of people have sun in the second house, but it's not going to mean the same thing. It's going to always deal with that concept of that second house. But what are all the different possibilities? Now, if your sun is in the third house, did your father or father figure have something to do with your early childhood? So there's going to be themes there of your early childhood, right? And someone could say, well, duh, everyone, who had a father, but that's not always the case for everybody, right? So you can have a person who had a great relationship with their father in their childhood, but then their parents got divorced. And so their sun is in the third house. So that also means it's impacting their communication or their learning. And maybe their sun is also squaring Saturn. And that because of these experiences, they've struggled to stay steady. Maybe the divorce means you had to leave and it interrupted your schooling, right? It interrupted your learning, so when your sun is in the third house, there's going to be some themes around either early life. It's going to be really impactful. It's not just like everybody's like, oh yeah, my father was around when I was a kid. And again, some people didn't have their father around. So it could have been situations like that where like you had your father up until a certain age, and then either the relationship changed and he was around, or there were some difficulties there when staying with him staying present in your life. Or for some people, the sun in the third house could be my father taught me a lot of things. I learned a lot from my father. I learned how to think. I learned how to express myself through my father's influence. The sun in the fourth house, the father's going to have a dominant role within the family. And again, that could be great if he's this person who's really respected, he's honorable, he protects his family, all those great things could be sun in the fourth house. But let's say a person has the sun and there's some negative aspects there. Let's say there's even sun squaring a moon in this person's chart. It can mean that there could have been issues in the household, friction. What if there's sun conjunct Mars in Aries, right? Or sun conjunct Mars in Libra in that fourth house? Well, there's some conflict within that house because Mars, we know, is the opposite sign of Libra. So we would have to look at the person's experiences plus the aspects in their chart plus the degrees to really understand it. But when the sun is in the fourth house, there's typically some energy there that is in some way impactful from the father or father figure. It could be great, right? That family felt supported, or it could be negative, where maybe the father was a little overbearing, right? Maybe that is the person's experience. But either way, there's going to be something there. Now, sun in the fifth house is going to be interesting because someone can say, well, does that mean that the father was really his personality? Was he very fun? Was he very adventurous? Could be, but we also would have to look at, again, the person's experiences and their chart. I know someone with the sun in the fifth house who doesn't have a relationship with his father, but the sun is in the fifth house. But the fifth house is also the house of children. And so this person's father has a lot of kids. So even though this person's sun is them, right? This person's sun sign represents them and their experiences in terms of their outer identity, and the sun represents their consciousness of who they are, right? That's what the sun is. I'm aware of these things, right? But the sun still shows up in the chart to show a different dynamic with the father figure. And then you might say, well, wait, how does that make it negative? Well, this person has the sun opposing Neptune. And when you have the sun making aspects to Neptune, it can mean there's some type of distance, there's some type of illusion, or some type of, unclear, something that's unclear. Especially when you have sun square Neptune, sun opposing Neptune, and you're a person that has some issues with your father or father figure, there's always going to be something around that. Okay. So the sun in fifth house, though, could. And the person who has positive aspect of sun, it can mean they have a really fun father. But the father might be the fun parent, and maybe the mom is more the one who is the disciplinarian, or maybe the mother is the one who is more strict. The mother is more structured. She has, there's something within that range. Or it could be a father who's really talented or really famous in some way, right? So you have to understand with astrology, everything has multiple layers, but you want to be careful because everything doesn't mean everything, right? So you have to still keep the original meaning of the house and the signs for it to be astrology. Otherwise, you're just making things up, right? The sun in the sixth house would represent there's something daily. This father helps support with someone's daily life. Maybe they're just very present. Maybe they teach them work ethics. They teach them habits. This could be a person when you grow up with a person who has a father who's very particular. You get up, you do this, you make your bed, you do this, right, like a military type father, right? Someone who has adopted these very regimented type of practices. But sometimes people thrive through that. Some people hate it, but some people are like, wow, I learned how to really be responsible. I learned how to really be what I need to be because that was enforced on me. Because remember, the sun is bright. It's not hidden under the surface. The moon in the sixth house may give you a little bit more of that nurturing every day, right? That sun is going to it's action oriented. The sun is about showing, is about demonstrating. So this wouldn't be a very, under the surface energy. But the sun in the sixth house could also mean, a parent who works a lot. Let's say this person has, this experience. Now, again, your parents' chart is also going to help you understand them, right? So like if we have a person's chart and their parents' chart, that's great because we're going to get a lot of insight that way. Okay. Like also mean that the father worked a lot. And that could be good or bad. Maybe that he just wasn't around because he had to work a lot. Or maybe it's that he provided a lot for the family, or he had a really strong work ethic that you admire, right? And so think about the sun and the moon, they're imprints on us. And whether we feel an aversion, to that person because we didn't like they didn't work a lot. We felt he put his work before his family. Or some people who respect and honor that part. Right? Or he made you work a lot, right? The father showed you like, no, this is how life's going to be. You got to get up, you got to do this and that. Now, the sun being in the seventh house, your experience here can be more, it can be beneficial if it's positive in terms of like your father is figure is a confidant, is like a friend, it's someone that you like to talk to. This is someone who gives you really good advice, or you feel you might be a little bit like, it's like he might love all the kids equally, but you two have like a special bond where you really understand each other, and you're really like, there's like, it's a very you're there's a bond that represents a partnership in terms of how you think and rely on each other. Okay. Now, again, that's going to mean something different for you, right? As an individual, as an adult, as somebody who's going through the world in the seventh house, we know his partnership can be romance, it can be marriage, it can be business partnership. But again, in astrology, once you get really in depth, when you are interpreting things, you don't just say, oh, the sun means this, and this is what your relationship is going to be about, right? Like if you really want to go deep, we have to look at all the dimensions of the sun and talk about that. Now, again, if a person does not want to talk about their parents in a reading, then we don't go over that. But when we look at what our experience has been, also it kind of teaches and shows you what you want. So a person who has a very strong relationship with their father, especially let's say if it's a woman and she goes into a relationship, she kind of wants that same type of bond. No, like I need to feel supported. Like, it's the kind of woman who's like, well, my dad did this for me. My dad did that for me, right? Especially when we think of the seventh house as being Venus being the ruler. So there's going to be that imprint. Okay, like this demonstration of how you should be treated that sometimes you can see, especially within like a woman's chart. She's a sun in the seventh house. Now you could have another situation where there is a codependent relationship. Again, we would have to look at what else is happening in the chart. Okay, there could be a codependency there. There can be there could be a situation where maybe you feel like the parent is not parenting you, right? You're the parent's a friend, the parents too, right? Especially if we look at other placements, if it's Sun in Aquarius, we know, right away, the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, and the sun also has to be in a house where it has to partner up. The sun wants to usually shine on its own, but it can't when it's in the seventh house. So there could also be those dynamics as well, where there's like this, the parents a friend are trying too hard to relate to the kid, but they're not really parenting them, and they don't give them that discipline. The sun in the eighth house. Typically, when the sun's in the eighth house, this can be really there. The father had a really powerful impact on you. And the thing I always say about the eighth house is sometimes people are not aware of how it really affected them, because the eighth house is not a very open house, right? It is a house where things can get very deep because there's so much intensity to it. There's so many layers to the eighth house. And so when the sun is in the eighth house, it can represent something. Even sometimes some people can be loss or death through the eighth house. Now, of course, no one lives forever, but it would have been more early life, or would have been something that was quite devastating. When I think of the eighth house, my half sister she's a sun in the eighth house, right? And then I have my son in the 12th house, which is loss, right? 12th house is loss. It has more of that disconnect, right? Whereas in both, obviously our father passed away, and so it shows up differently in our charts. But the point here is, with the eighth house, the sun being here, there's going to be a very strong emotional response, whether you feel like you have to measure up to your father, you have to measure up to his expectations of what you're going to become, or it can be there's some type of really strong, some people can be, again, depending on the person, it could be more intense. It could be more there, especially if there's any Pluto aspects to the sun, or there's any hard person has a very plutonic chart, abuse or things of that nature. It doesn't always have to be that deep. So the eighth house has many layers. When we're doing an actual chart reading, you can dive deeper into what that looks like. Now, the sun in ninth house can be representing the father, who is very much, he has a strong influence on your beliefs. He has a strong influence on how you live your life. He has a strong influence on your morals. But guess what? What was that influence? Because when you look at the sun in the ninth house, could it be a father who was like taught you virtue and taught you how to be honorable and how to be honest and how to live your life in a certain way? Or maybe your father had a prominent position in terms of religion or some type of platform, right? But could the sun also represent a father who's overbearing in his nurture and his nature in terms of the things that he believed, and you had to believe what he believed, right? Could it be he, to this day, maybe you love him, but he's kind of got a very staunch opinion of certain things, and you're going to have an opinion, right? If you have the sun in ninth house, you get your vitality, you get your your sense of confidence through like living the way that you want to live. And so you can sometimes see that, right? Our experience with our charts is going to be based on the things that we need and how we interpret them. This doesn't even mean that your father's wrong. It just can mean he's very has a very specific belief system and you don't. Yours is different. And so there could be a clash there, right? Especially if there's any squaring of those suns or squaring of that energy, or there's some type of theme that represents there's going to be a disconnect in terms of what you think or what you believe or how you live your life. But again, it's all going to depend on your chart, your energy, your experience. Sun ninth house can also be this a guide. It's a mentor, really good at guiding you through life, exposing you maybe even to different things. This is the father's like, no, I want to prepare you for life. Right? You're going to learn this, right? You're going to go here. We're going to do this. You got to understand how life really is. The sun in the 10th house. Well, your sun in the 10th house can mean maybe your father is someone who is very connected, very career oriented. This could be someone who has a very specific goal. This could be like he was in some way very much instrumental in helping you understand how to achieve certain things. So here's what we have to understand. Your son is in the 10th house. We're not talking about his 10th son in the 10th house, right? Your experience with your father could be there could be positives there, like I was set up for life. I was able to go to these schools because of my father investing money, or I was told I could be really good at this, or I could be a great athlete, or I could be a great, student. I can be great at this, or I should go to this college, this Ivy League college, right? But the sun in the 10th house could also represent pressure put on you that maybe your father did not even amount to. So you have people who are like, my father keeps telling me I have to do this, and he didn't even do it. He didn't go to college, but he's forcing this on me. And sometimes you can have those experiences where the father is, you feel that you can't. So by the 8th house is you can't measure up to what he wants you to become, right? What he thinks you're going to become. The 10th house, you feel like you can't measure up to things he wants you to do, right? The direction you want to go in, the goals you want to go in. Again, it could be super positive where he's influencing you, and maybe it's through what he does and how he lives his life, and you see him as a role model. Or it could also just be this kind of pressure to succeed, and it's like, dang, I feel like I'm never gonna be what he wants me to be, and like, oh, my cousin is doing this and I'm doing this, and I keep being compared. So the 10th house placements means you're going to be successful automatically. I see a lot of people with placements in the 10th house that don't know what they want, but they know it's important to have a goal. So that is thematic in their chart. But just because people have placements in the 10th house doesn't mean they always know how to use that potential. And so with the sun in the 10th house, you could even have people whose fathers were very prominent. Their father was a professional athlete. Now they feel like, wow, I want to be that too. So there's that pressure which your father is, or his position in society, or his work. Something could be you're going to benefit. You can either benefit from that, his connections, how he's perceived, or you can feel a pressure, right? Or you can feel like your father, let's say somebody has a negative sun square, right? And this chart shows they're very, this person can have some insecurities. This person can struggle with certain things with your father's son, the 10th house. I mean, your son is in the 10th house, and your father is known for some great things. Everyone in the community loves him, but you had a very different experience with him. You had a very bad experience with your father, right? Again, if a person has enough negative aspects of the sun, it doesn't mean their whole life is bad, but it can mean that particular topic of the father can be an issue because everyone else thinks your father's great, but that, behind the scenes, how you were treated or something like that. So again, my point here is to give the good and the bad, and people need to figure out what that looks like for them. The sun in the 11th house. If your son's in the 11th house, we already know I have sun in the 11th house videos of what it means for you. If we're talking about your father, it could mean sometimes that other things were very important to him, his organizations, his networks, his connections. It could be good. If he was known as, he was known in your, he was the head of something in your community, or your father was in a band, your father was in a bowling league, your father was in something that required him to be among a group. Now, for you, we would have to ask, does that help you? Did that help you recognize the importance of teamwork and working together and being a part of something? Because maybe he influenced you to do it. Oh, yeah, you should join the team. You should join the softball team. Oh, you should join the cheerleading team, right? Did your father influence that in you? Or, right, Did he prioritize his friendships and his networks and those organizations over the family? Again, we can even look at what's in your fourth house to see those different things. Are there aspects between the sun and the moon? Like, what is the aspect between his sun and your sun? Like, we can see those things. If the father is providing support, we can see through those aspects right through the sun in your chart. And so, with the sun in the 11th house, again, it can be great in terms of also teaching you a lot about the world or the society. Wanting you to understand, kind of similar to the ninth house, but not as preachy, not as like, moral, not as like, about experiences. With the 11th house, it's also, if it's a positive thing, it's like he in some way can shape and form how you look at the world, how you look at society, how you interact with other people, how you interact with groups. It's the person that says, yeah, my father was always taking me somewhere on the road with him to meet different people. My father was always, involved in something. He was always doing something. Now, again, depends on the person, because then what you can have is, if you never felt fully accepted by your mom or your dad or your family, your son's now in the 10th, 11th house. So what are you doing? You need to feel fulfilled. You're looking for belonging because you didn't get it when you were a kid. So again, these are all the possibilities, not all of them, but some of them. This is just to give people a head start in understanding astrology. It's up to each individual to do the research, connect the dots, or get a reading. Now, the sun in the 12th house. I will speak on this personally. My son is in the 12th house. Everyone who has a son in the 12th house is not necessarily going to have lost their father at a young age. We would have to look at other parts of the chart that support this. I see a lot with people who don't have a relationship with their father, either due to loss or due to their father not being around. Sun aspects to Neptune. Now, for me, it's been, since I was a child. And for me, it's more of, I'm missing something about understanding my father's full life, right? My parents were married. We all lived together as a family. Me, my mom, my dad, my brothers. I mean, my brother. I do have. I do have. I have. I had. I have half brothers and half sisters as well. But for the most part, like in our household, some of my siblings lived with us at different times, but for the most part, like it was, the four of us. And so point making, I knew my father, knew everything up until that point. But the problem is, like, I was very young when he passed away. So a lot of the things that I know about my father is through either records or my mother telling me, and not from him. And so because of that, though there are things that are good and positive, and there are some things that I know he's dealt with his own life, um, that Neptune in my fourth house means that I feel that there's something unclear. And see, my sun trines my Neptune. And so for me, it's not bad. I wasn't abandoned by my father. So a person who has sun opposing Neptune, a person who has sun squaring Neptune, and if it matched that they also have issue, abandonment, or their father's not around, it could be harder for them. I'm not saying it wasn't hard for me. It was. But I got through it. And I was lucky and blessed that my mother, picked up and raised us, and, you know, um, way into adulthood. So I'm grateful for that. But the point that I'm making is that when your son is in the 12th house, there's going to be a disconnect from the father. Some people, it's more so the father's around, you know where to find him, but there could be some substance abuse. Sun 12th house, can represent, it can show more than just you being in isolation. Sun in 12th house, it can show your father has a substance abuse issue. Your father has escapism tendencies. Because even if you don't have your father around all the time and your father's alive, but you see him every once in a while and you're like, wow, every time I see my dad, he's drunk or high, or he's always chasing, or maybe he's always chasing some dream and he's never really, able to fully settle down. Those are things you can experience as well. The positive, I would say, with the sun in the 12th house, for people whose fathers are here or alive, you can see people whose fathers influence their faith, influence their spirituality, influence their strength. Even if you think spiritually about it, if you really want to dive spiritually, people whose fathers are not here, maybe there is still, spiritually, your father has helped you. You believe in things such as, spirit guides, or, there could be, right? And I'm not going to go into all of that because I know people have different opinions, but the sun in the 12th house, it does represent some sort of loss or some disconnection. And so it is really important when you have Sun in the 12th house to dive deeper into understanding fully how that's affected you. Okay. Because you can always feel like you're searching for a sense of self and identity through your father or his experiences or his story. And so for people whose fathers are here, I think sometimes that can cause, sometimes it's harder because he's accessible, but he's not. And that's the last thing I'm going to say about the houses. As far as the signs go, it does not mean your father is that sign, right? It means that those are the things you see in your father, just like with your mother, right? My mom was not a Sagittarius, but I saw Sagittarius things in my mother through my experience and our energy together. So I'm a Sun in Virgo. My father was not a Virgo at all. My father was a Leo. He had Aquarius or Pisces moon. I'm still redoing his chart to figure that out. But he had my dad had a lot of Libra energy and Leo energy. That the Virgo in the 12th house in me has always felt like I'm trying to piece together my father's life. Yes, I have records. Yes, I know things about him. Yes, he was in the household until he passed. But as my Sun in Virgo energy, it's trying to analyze and understand my parents' relationship and understand everything and how it came together. Like there's almost like an obsessive need to understand the details, right? For me. Okay. Whereas if someone has their Sun in Sagittarius, they're viewing their father as he's always roaming, he's always around, he's always going from place to place. My father, if you're a Sun in Sag person, your father might be someone that's hard to pin down, right? If you're a Sun in Pisces, your father gives you some level of faith, right? Or your father could be evasive, right? And you feel like you're constantly trying to chase that. Now, even worse, if you have a father who has really good positive traits, people like him, but you have an issue with your father, right? Again, your sign is not it's not that your sign is who your father is unless he is that particular zodiac sign, but you're going to experience those things from him. Just like with your mother, your moon sign. Okay? If you're Sun in Libra, you're going to experience, you might have a cordial relationship with your father, whether he lives in the household or not, right? If you're Sun in Aries, especially like if you're in Aries and you have an Aries father, you can be butting heads a lot, right? You're competitive and maybe it could be fun, but maybe it could also be negative. And I think the last thing I'm going to say is similar to the moon sign. You have a different sun sign than your siblings, and if you don't, you don't. But a lot of times, our experiences and our opinions on our parents are not always the same. Even when we've had the same experience, we don't necessarily always have the same stories, right? People have different personalities. Some kids get along with different parents and vice versa. Of course, you should love your kids equally, but you can't control if you have just a better relationship with one over the other. You can, if you're a parent, you've got to try and mend that bridge. But what I'm saying is that doesn't always mean it's a bad thing, right? Just because one kid is close to the other parent or vice versa, it doesn't always mean that there's a dislike. It just can mean that you have similarities, right? And it could be a healthy relationship, right? It doesn't have to be this combative thing. But the point that I'm making is it is very possible, especially if you have more than one sibling, y'all are going to have very different opinions about your father. Or you can have somebody who says, oh, he was great, and someone that says, oh, but he wasn't there for me. Or you have people who are like, he was there, but he only gave me money. And someone may say, he was there emotionally, but I didn't have the resources. Like everyone's always going to have a different story, about how their parenting affected them is what I want to say. Okay. So that was it for this video. I don't want this to be too long. I just wanted to share this message for anyone who this could relate to.